right, welcome back to News Gang, and we are still talking about all the things that have been happening this week. And right now, let's talk about Gashuri. You know, I have to start with you when we talk about Bonchari, Rorie, and Juja.
Yes.
I think the headline on all of those things was what happened to Jubilee, because I mean, this especially Juja and Rorie, those typically would be Jubilee strongholds, but we saw different things happen. In Bonchari, we saw the handshake partners basically, you know, fielding candidates against each other, which was an interesting development. So these by-elections, or whatever it's worth, they had interesting political undertones.
Absolutely. My brother and colleague in the political desk, Sam Ogina, tonight called it a hat-trick of losses. and I would agree with him, it was a hat-trick of losses. I mean, 3 by-elections, 3 losses. In Rorie, in Bonchari, and in Juja. More fundamentally, losses in Rorie and Juja. That was quite heavy. And more specifically, the loss in Juja. This is in Kiambu County, President Uhuru Kenyatta's county. So the party leader's county. And the party lost in the party leader's county. That's very telling. But what is also interesting is that you would have expected some bravado from the Jubilee party, dismissing the loss and everything else. But I find it interesting that no less than the Secretary General of the party concedes that they made mistakes. And those mistakes were obvious. One, maybe they ignored the sentiments on the ground and probably didn't conduct proper intelligence in terms of who was the most preferred candidate. This night, in that interview with Yvonne, the Secretary General alluded to something that I found very interesting, that there were interests about giving the ticket to the widow. That was what I would consider a fatal mistake for the party in that by-election, because it was also important to listen to the sentiments on the ground. What were people saying? Who was their preferred candidate? And take note that the candidate that won, George Koimburi with People's Empowerment Party of Moses Kuria, was also in Jubilee at one point. And so left the party.
And vied in 2017.
And had vied in 2017 and finished second. And so those are some of the considerations they would probably have made in terms of experience, presence on the ground, and so on and so forth. And so PP aside, Koimburi was also popular. He was a strong candidate in his own merit, and probably it was an own goal for the Jubilee party. They discarded a strong candidate who went away, came back with a different party, and beat the same party that discarded him. Maybe that was a good lesson for them. There were also local sentiments. A number of MCAs in that constituency elected on a Jubilee ticket, campaigned for the PEP candidate. Tells you something about the infighting in the Jubilee party. In Rorie, you could see local sentiments and a bit of national sentiments. You saw members of parliament from the Jubilee party going there to campaign for their candidate. And on the other hand, a team of, do you call them Jubilee B members, went there to campaign for their candidate, led by the woman representative, Faith Gitau. So it looked like Jubilee A versus Jubilee B in those contests.
Jubilee versus Jubilee.
Jubilee versus Jubilee.
Right.
So does it also tell you that probably if Jubilee was intact, it would have easily clinched those seats? Look at Bonchari, for example. Candidate number 2 and candidate number 3
were both.
You can call them Jubilee A, Jubilee B. Meaning, once again, if they had teamed up, probably they would have put on a better show in Bonchari. So it boils down to the friction and the cracks in the Jubilee party. The Secretary General says they will use the 3 losses to review their mode of operation in the upcoming by-elections, particularly in my home constituency of Kiamba. I don't want to say anything about it, lest I'm accused of So I at that point I want to recuse myself.
Okay.
On that point,
I'm happy to
and cede my time to Honorable Yvonne.
Because even see what is happening now going forward. There's a statement that's come out today from the Secretary General of the Jubilee Party about how they're going to conduct nominations for those upcoming by-elections in what seems like a boardroom process rather than an open nomination exercise, or even at best a direct party ticket. And obviously then now starting to raise some questions on that. Sam Ogina called it a hat trick of losses. I would say it's been a string of defeats, because put these 3 by-elections aside, but there was also the others in London Ward, in Gaturi as well. So there's been quite some losses for the Jubilee Party, and there's no doubt that the splinter groups in the name of PEP and UDA are eating into Jubilee's numbers. It was interesting to see today that in my interview with him, the Secretary General of the party took personal responsibility, for what happened in these parties. And what we might remind persons that a majority party, particularly, losing in local elections says something about whether they still have
in its own
strongholds,
the pulse, yeah.
And in the president's backyard. Do they still, understand what the people on the ground are saying? Do they still have control and grip of the party? Those are some really serious questions they're going to ask themselves now. Those splinter groups, now Jubilee, not quite. Will it have the majority that it had in 2017 come 2022 with all the talk of everything that's happening? The deputy president, is clearly on his own path. And we know the history of political parties in this country, and whether they field a candidate in successive elections, I think with the exception of ODM, and who've not gotten a presidential candidate in properly elected. What will Jubilee look like in the next couple of months? What will they look like? What will their performance and their showing be in 2022, considering that their party leader is now at the end of his term, basically? So it's interesting to see where Jubilee is. I also hesitate to add that it might be worth looking at what's also happening within ODM as we go into 2022 as well. Issues to do with what's happening at the coast. Take a look at those MPs who, Owen Baya, Aisha Jumwa, and a host of others. And there's also now, talk of succession for the party leader, Raila Odinga. So interesting to see how these two parties that have played a key role in Kenya's democracy over the last 10 years or so together, what happens come 2022?
Gaturi said something.
Same line. I want to read a Facebook post by the governor of Nakuru, Lee Kinyanjui. Allow me to read 2 paragraphs. He said, in recent by-elections, our promise to uphold the will of the people and respect their democratic right has been violated at the nomination level, resulting in the entry of unpopular candidates. Flawed nominations leave a bitter taste on the supporters who seek to revenge in the real election. The outcome of recent by-elections show a growing disconnect with public feelings. We cannot address this challenge by denying its existence. Imposing candidates because of connections, emotions, or economic gain is to write own obituary. Very strong words.
Very strong words.
Jamila, you wanted to say
Yes, I want to say something about what Gashuri had spoken about Jubilee versus Jubilee. I look at voter turnout in the by-elections, but I'll start with Bonchari, where the winner, the ODM candidate, got 8,049 votes. But look at the number 2. The Jubilee candidate got over 7,000, and the UDA candidate got over 6,000. If that vote had been consolidated, that was 14,243 votes, enough for them to win in Bonchari. So I don't think ODM needs to be very comfortable with that win, because look at the people who did not vote for you, who did not vote for your candidate. The turnout there was about 50,000, which was way better than what was seen in Juja, where there was voter apathy. I think there was 20-something thousand voters showed up out of over 100 registered voters. So is it voter apathy in terms of what were not happy with the candidates who they had been given, or is it voter apathy in terms of tumechoka, that we're not interested chagueni ule mnataka kuchagua? Or is it a message, like you spoke, that's being sent to Jubilee Party about how people really feel, especially in a region when 2017 they clearly swept it all? In fact, I remember we had said here once that if you are a candidate and you had your picture and the president's picture next to you in 2017, it was a shoo-in. Hapo hiyo kiti ni chako. So what has happened between 2017 and now, when candidates of the ruling party, the party that is in power, are losing in by elections and in wards and even in constituencies, and that's one. And two, so what next for Jubilee? Because that's what Raphael Tuju was saying now. They want to regroup, they want to look and see what went wrong so that they can regroup maybe before 2022. And you talk about how parties are in Kenya. Parties are vehicles for elections. Yeah. So I won't be surprised.
And Kiraitu Murungi said as much. I mean, he was basically saying that Jubilee has done its time, that basically it has outlived its purpose, and now, in fact, he said even he himself is basically looking around, because they're saying, well, it is clear to everybody that Jubilee will not be the same Jubilee it was come 2022. So he said there will be new formations, and I think that is true. So in a sense, perhaps it is a moot question, Linas, asking where Jubilee will be next year.
Yes, indeed it is. And you can see the shifting already taking place on the ground. I think it shouldn't be taken away from Moses Kuria that he has had a great week.
Yeah.
MP for Gatundu South. Gatundu South borders Juja, if my geography is right, Francis. And remember, Moses Kuria is the MP for the president in Gatundu South. And he's had this long-running now poor relationship with the party and with the president, and has been really wanting to create his own identity. And at elected MCA number, first elected member of parliament, and he's got an MCA in Muranga in another by-election previously. He's having a good run. He can say he's making a statement, but I don't want us to overrate the importance of by-elections coming 14 months to a general election. Because what also happens is parties underinvest in their energies in that. Because what do you want to prove? It's the newcomers that really invest in by-elections. And what we have seen is UDA has invested very heavily in by-elections. We have seen PEP investing in by-elections, because the new players such as UDA and PEP want to make a statement ahead of next year. So has it been a good week for new players? Absolutely. A bad week for old players like Jubilee? Yes. And it doesn't help when Governor Kiraitu Murungi issues what sounded to me like an exit interview from Jubilee, saying that, we're done with this.
For me, it sounded like an obituary. That was a good man. The man lying there was a
very, very good man.
He served his time. He ran the race.
That's true. And that's the story of our political parties. Remember, Akina Kiraitu were also in PNU before.
And BAS.
Before that, the BAS party, and before that there was the National Rainbow Coalition. Every 10-year cycle, where it seems that's the only time there is a change of government, there'll also be a change of party. And so it sounds to me like it's not too early to say Jubilee will not be in this shape, will not be the party of government in 2022. Maybe it has to come up with a new name or be in another formation, if and when it can be able to reclaim.
I would also think it this way. Such a loss or such losses also give the party an opportunity to rethink, rebrand, re-strategize. This is a very good opportunity to do that. And if probably there was need to shed off some baggage, this ought to be probably the right time to do it. Because I would think there's an excuse, there's a reason now. If you wanted to shed off some guys, you can now do it based on the performance in the by-elections. But failure to do something as a result of those losses will definitely be a lost opportunity for the party. While probably you may not call it dead and out, it still has an opportunity to do a few things. How they take advantage of this opportunity,
one last thing, because I know we have one more thing to talk about. One last thing is about Bonchari. I mean, there was a significant thing that happened there. The fact that for the first time since the handshake, we actually saw Jubilee and ODM fielding candidates in the same by-election. I mean, in Kibra, we saw how Jubilee MPs went and campaigned for Imran. We have seen Jubilee withdrawing, for example, from Sambweni, Kabuchai. There's been all this camaraderie that they expressed even when it came to by-elections. Now here we have a situation where Bonchari comes and, you know, every man or woman, for that matter, for themselves. I mewhat really happened? Does anybody around this table really know
what happened?
And what does that mean for the handshake going forward?
You see, what ought to be understood is that the handshake did not essentially say Jubilee is gone, ODM is gone. They're still political parties with interests. I mean, ODM would want to add to its numbers and even use some of these by-elections to prepare for next year's general election. So there's one part of the political discourse that is the handshake, but there's also another part of the political reality that these parties are also competitors and are preparing for a general election. And so where you feel you can strongly go out there and look for a seat, you definitely do it. It is also how they deal with each other in the course of that by-election. You didn't see a lot of harsh words being exchanged between Jubilee and ODM, though in Bonchari there was talk of use of state machinery, particularly the police. You even saw press conferences by
actually tweeted a very uncharacteristic tweet in these days, I would say.
So, but you see, that is on a specific issue. But in the course of that campaign period, you never had what you'd probably have had before the handshake, where very harsh words were thrown at the president and harsh words thrown at the ODM party leader and vice versa. The specific issue, the specific allegation was on the use of state resources and particularly the police force. So at that point, I wouldn't say it was as vicious as it would have been were it not for the handshake. So in one way or another, maybe the handshake has stemmed a little bit of the potent political rhetoric that you would see between ODM and Jubilee before the handshake. But that does also not take away the competitive nature of the two main parties in the handshake.
Okay,
I just want to take this away from, you know, the Jubilee versus ODM, and there's something that I think would be interesting to see going forward, and that is to do with Juja and Bonchari. Both of the MPs elect, that's George Koimburi and Pavel Oimeke, you know, have cases that they have to deal with going forward. Interestingly, many will remember that Koimburi was at one point said to be on the run, and there was a warrant of arrest issued out for him because he allegedly submitted a fake degree certificate to the EACC and the IEBC while, you know, trying to vie for this seat. In fact, he was in court just about 8 days to the election and has already taken plea. What is Nek and Jekwat saying? That apparently he didn't register nor sit for the 1994 KCSE exam. The Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology registrar wrote a letter saying that the papers that he presented were not authentic and that there was no record that he had ever actually attended the institution. Pavel Oimeke as well, you know, having a corruption case against him. We remember he was a former Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority boss. He was arrested and interdicted in December last year. He's denied 2 counts at the anti-corruption court for allegedly receiving a 200,000 shilling bribe to authorize the opening of a filling station. Granted, the Constitution says that they can still run because, you know, a person is disqualified only when they're subject to a sentence of imprisonment of at least 6 months.
And has exhausted all the appellate mechanisms.
Yes. However, these are 2 MPs elect who will be dealing with criminal cases, fraud, anti-corruption. what will happen going forward in the courts? Should a decision be made one way or another?
They might just be in the Public Accounts Committee or one of those.
There you go.
Watchdog committees of
so
Parliament.
for me, I just found that, very interesting.
Grilling
something,
the next boss at EPRA.
There you go.
And the national prayer breakfast is coming up.
But Joe,
okay, I want us to talk about BBI, so make it quick.
I would be happy if probably we can mention and maybe show a video of the stampede, the fracas during the tallying of the Juja by-election results. I think it is important for Robert to play that clip. Joe, that was not a good sign. It was, those were terrible optics. And more so, as we talk about contested elections, one of the principles behind the handshake was to deal with electoral injustice. And what we saw in Juja was not a very good sign, in my opinion. It tells you that some of these things have not been dealt with, that anything can go wrong in such a process. But more fundamentally, I think it is important to keep reminding those who follow elective matters that you have very little complaint to make at the tallying center. If there is any rigging to be done, it can only be done at the polling station between 6 a.m. and 5 p.m. Tallying center is basically a place where you do mathematics, this plus this, this plus this, this plus this. The supremacy of the polling station, such that votes are cast, counted, and announced at the polling station, and even a form posted on the notice boards in polling stations. So when you see the kind of fracas that we saw at the Mangu High School auditorium, then it's a very sad situation. I heard Wafula Chebukati, the chairman of IEBC, say he has asked the Inspector General of Police and the DPP to investigate and prosecute those who are behind these skirmishes that even led to suspension of the tallying process.
For over 12 hours.
For over 12 hours.
That to suspend.
I hope there will be some action. Otherwise, it says that anything can happen and there are no consequences.
You imagine if we have a situation like that, for example, if for whatever reason that margin that Koimburi had disappeared overnight. I mean, and that happens usually in an election, for example, where your stronghold are still not counted and whatever. So imagine if by morning when they started and suddenly they have all these votes that came from Susan Waititu's strongholds and suddenly she's winning. You tell me what would happen. I mean, it is actually scary. And the moment you normalize violence, you see violence has a way of, it begets violence. So every time there is violence, it doesn't stop at the first violence. There's always going to be another one and another one. It's a spiral that
there's a napt analogy, and Linus can remember this, that an election is like you're dealing with a maize plantation and a granary. If you want to steal the maize, steal at the shamba in the plantation, if you must. Trying to deal with it at the granary, it has already been counted, stored, and probably there's even a watchman there. So you'll be easily noticed at that point. Linus can explain the analogy further.
Thank you. I mean, it's a very interesting analogy. But what I'm worried about, Joe, here is the consistent emerging trend. We saw these exact images out of the London ward in Nakuru. We saw exactly the same kind of images from Matungu. And now Juja. What we are observing here is a trend of very angry elections, devoid of civility, devoid of the willingness to accept the results and all that. And this should be worrying, given that we only have 14 months to the general election, and given that we are in a space where the IEBC is not in its top form. The police keep being accused of playing a role they should not be playing in elections. And you saw that statement by Raila Odinga, which was quite telling. Meaning then, are we going into another 2017 kind of election where the police, tear gas is part of the, maybe they should be giving people ballot papers and the tear gas canister. I don't know. It's like part of the voting material these days.
And it's usually so pointless, needless. You almost think as they've been given a quota of tear gas they must use before they go back.
Because I think in the past, here we've had to about close to about 10 by-elections, and we've witnessed the violence. But what else I've witnessed in this 10 by-elections is the interest in it, because most of them are local elections, not national. But the interests and the campaigns and I think even the resources that have been put into it, I think for many of these politicians and political parties, it's sort of like a rehearsal for 2022 elections, because they want to test the ground, kuona watu wanasema nini kuhusu. Because even if you look at the Machakos senatorial seat, it pitted from Kalonzo Musyoka, there was a Maendeleo Chapcha party, there was a former senator Mudhama, and then they come up kutafutana in the kingpin kwa hiyo eneo. You look at even the Matungu and the Kabuchai by elections and all that, and the fact that ANC had won in Fort Kenya, also it's something kuonyesha kwamba kumbe tuko na umaarufu. So I think it's a test run for most of these politicians in terms of 2022, wanaangalia ground iko vipi. And we forgot something, I think, and the wins by UDA, PPE, and the losses by Jubilee in Juja and in the wards, Gaturi, London, Lakeview, and Rurie. What does this mean for the deputy president? Because I was listening to some of the legislators from Mount Kenya who are allied to him, really gloating about how well they had done and the fact that walikuwa wanajipiga kifua. He tweeted, I don't know if we have the tweet by the deputy president, Roba, we can put it on air. And I think for him it's a point made that neza kuja kwako na nikakushinda, because the PPE is Moses Kuria's party who's allied to the deputy president. So ndo hiyo sasa, we thank God Hustler Nation victory in Juja and Rurie. Hiyo ni kusema kwamba nimekuja kwako nimekushinda. So basically this for them is a boost in terms of now the popularity of the party and those associated with him in the ground.
And also quite an indication on how probably UDA intends to approach the coalition politics in the coming election, where you allow parties, there's this thing called the Hustler Nation now, because PEP is not UDA, but it is being associated with supporters of the deputy president. So will they do the same thing probably in Coast, where you'll have a party that is aligned to the local politics, but working under the UDA umbrella? Because you can see the celebration in UDA of the Juja parliamentary seat is that of a coalition win, basically. So it tells us, it already gives an indication that UDA may not necessarily be the party they'll push in central Kenya, but they'll say, work with the parties that are homegrown in those areas. So it'll be PEP, probably, and others. And
as Jamila mentioned, I think it is important, the whole question of where the deputy president stands in this. And I think if there was anybody who was trying to stop his inroads in central Kenya, it just means that they still have a lot of work to do in that regard.